It's the end of the Second World War and economies are in ruins. Enter the greatest messiah of the financial institution, the US dollar. Ever since, no other currency has come close to contending its position. But the yuan is gaining quickly due to the country's economic growth and internationalization of the yuan. Not to mention the rest of the world is also losing confidence in the US dollar. So this begs the question, could the yuan replace the US dollar as the reserve currency? Last year, Chinese leaders made it known that one of their goals was to raise the yuan's profile as the reserve currency. And it turns out, China's economy and trade flows are strong enough to give support to such a move. On the other hand, China still needs to actually convince foreign central bankers to hold the Chinese yuan in reserve. And to achieve this, they've got a plan. In the summer of 2022, the People's Bank of China revealed that they were collaborating with 5 countries and the Bank for International Settlements to achieve this goal. It asked Indonesia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and Chile to contribute 15 billion yuan each, or approximately $2.2 billion, to the renminbi liquidity arrangement. Not to mention, Russia has made the Chinese yuan a de facto reserve currency already. All because China offered them help when the West placed sanctions on them due to their war with Ukraine. A friend in need is a friend indeed, right? This collaboration has resulted in 17% of Russia's foreign reserves being denominated in yuan. This also has made the yuan the third most demanded currency on the Moscow exchange. But get this, in the quest of dethroning the dollar, the US might have just dug its own grave. Because before the invasion, the yuan's trading volume was negligible. If these partnerships become stronger, the yuan could be further entrenched as a reserve currency. The trade relations between Russia and China have grown after the Ukraine war. It reached a record $190 billion last year, where the majority of the transactions took place in Chinese and Russian currencies. This was very similar to Brazil's central bank reports, which stated that the Chinese yuan had become the second most important currency in Brazilian foreign reserves after surpassing the euro. Just like was the case with Russia, the yuan was non-existent in the country's foreign reserves. But at the end of 2022, it accounted for 5.37% of their central bank's holdings in comparison to the euro's 4.74% share. It also launched various initiatives to promote the internationalization of the yuan. Not only has this helped the country boost its economy, but also alleviate pressure off its foreign exchange reserves in the long run. Because at the moment, it holds a huge stockpile of US dollars. If the US dollar loses value, the pressure on China's reserves can lift as well. None of this means that the yuan is anywhere close to dethroning the US dollar from the top place. 80.42% of Brazil's central bank holdings consisted of the dollar, which is proof enough. In fact, the majority of countries in the world hold tons of dollars in their central banks. In fact, globally, the yuan isn't even one of the top 5 currencies. After the dollar, the euro, yen, sterling pound, and Swiss franc are the next 4 most popular currencies. So, you know it's a long battle to fight. At this point, most of the worries about the yuan taking over the dollar stem because of China's economic success. As the recession continues and the purchasing power of Americans diminishes, the US will be forced to face some challenges. In turn, the Chinese seem to enjoy increased buying power and a growth in manufacturing shifts to the country too. But the fact remains that there are various non-economic reasons that also have to be considered in this conversation. Long story short, this will not be an easy journey for the yuan. For one, while the US is clearly a superpower in decline, it's still a superpower, and will remain so for the foreseeable future. And that knowledge gives foreign investors the confidence to continue investing in their assets. You can look into the past and see how the Roman coins, Arabian dinar, or the Byzantines' gold solidus were dominant currencies at the time these respective empires reigned. At this stage, the value of the dollar comes from the USA's global economic power. Because of its diverse economic growth, it can even survive harsh periods of recession, which makes it an ideal location to invest in. This only increases demand for the US dollar. And because the USD is so prevalent in most countries, it's also very easy to use. In 2022, almost half of the international trade transactions took place in US dollars, and almost half of all US banknotes worth $950 billion were in the hands of foreign citizens. While the Chinese yuan is just inconvenient in the global markets, here's the thing. The yuan isn't easy to convert, nor can it be freely traded. This makes it very hard for countries to pay for imports with this currency. The kind of confidence and ease that the US dollar offers takes decades to build, which is just what the country had. After the end of the Second World War, it was one of the most economically prosperous nations in the world, which made the dollar become extremely valuable. And thanks to the Bretton Woods Conference, 44 countries agreed to place the US dollar at the center of the new global economy. So the US was the rich kid on the block that got its hands on the newest skateboard. Of course, everyone wanted a piece of that, or at least strike a friendship with benefits. China's lack of transparency will also not make it easy for the yuan to gain credibility. In fact, it is one of the biggest reasons why other nations struggle to adopt currencies like the yuan and ruble. Because of the rather undemocratic decision-making processes, it's tough for traders to rely on these currencies as reliable alternatives. At this stage, China is trying to reduce the central bank's intervention in the currency. Later, it will plan to make it more transparent. So the yuan is still far from becoming more market-oriented. In comparison to the US dollar, the yuan has only recently started to build confidence in its currency. In fact, at this point, the yuan made up only 2.7% of the total foreign exchange reserves. But that doesn't mean that the yuan can't get to a place of power eventually. A Bloomberg study stated that the Chinese currency may be able to become an alternative to the US dollar, and this multipolar world could be a reality in the next few decades. China has already proved that it can create new solutions. Just look at how they helped launch the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. This alternative to the World Bank has helped fight Western influence in the Asian region. If it can fight off the influence of such established organizations, there is a chance that the yuan might become competitive against the US dollar. Not to mention, many feel that the US has taken many steps that reduce the appeal of the US dollar in many parts of the world, not only among foes, but friends too. The IMF reported that global dollar reserves had hit an all-time low within the last 25 years, and there are a lot of reasons for that. For one, China is doing everything in its power to strengthen the yuan and to stop using the US dollar. Then we also have countries like Russia, Brazil, Australia, and Japan that have begun to use yuan for their international transactions. But one other reason that could cause countries to shift away from the US dollar is because of the various sanctions that the country has imposed on others. Its sanctions on Russia forced its rival country to move to the yuan. And Russia isn't the only one. The US has imposed economic sanctions on over a dozen countries like Iran, Iraq, Libya, Venezuela, Sudan, and many more. While these sanctions may have been placed to curb the rise of communism in North Korea or to counter terrorism, it's not very effective. Mainly because these nations can find suitable sources of finance through China. Iraq is now one of the newest nations to begin trade with China in yuan. Even Saudi Arabia is finally open to selling its oil in other currencies. And the oil-rich nation may very well begin selling some of it to China in yuan. Iran, on the other hand, has completely set aside the US dollar for its trade with Russia and would be conducting all transactions in the Russian ruble. While the shift to other currency may seem to be decades away, there's a clear interest from many parties that they no longer want to be reliant on the US dollar alone. But to put the dollar to rest, China has a lot of challenges it needs to overcome. Do you think the US dollar could be replaced by the yuan all over the world? Let us know what you think in the comments and check out our other videos.